We've talked.
Mics are hot.
No, they are not. But we're not on yet.
Technically, we are.
No. It's not till he counts down.
No, that's when we start recording, so we have a good feed.
Oh, okay. But are people hearing us?
They can if they tune in right now.
Oh,
As soon as Robert gets out, we'll go.
Oh no, you guys go. Okay, that's no problem. You guys just go.
you have to tell us beforehand.
I did. I told you right when it happened.
He did actually.
You do?
I
All right.
Hey, Matt, you want to count us down?
Yeah, I don't want to pick up all the.
Okay.
figured.
All right, here we go. 5, 4, 3.
Hi, I'm Dan Watanabe.
And I'm Sarah Ann Saran Fox. And this is Dan and Saran Take on Hollywood.
Today we're going to be talking about one of the fun aspects of show business and of education about show business, and that is the relationship between scandals and art.
Absolutely.
And the book that really started all of this was a book that came out in 1965 as a paperback. It was called Hollywood Babylon.
By Kenneth Anger.
Kenneth Anger was actually a star in A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1935 and then became an independent filmmaker, and one of the first filmmakers who specialized in underground films targeting the gay community, which at that time was largely illegal. And Hollywood Babylon was his labor of love. The original edition was published in France in 1959, and a illicit paperback came out in 1965 by Arizona Press. In 1974, the official version came out from Straight Arrow Books, and it caused a minor sensation in publishing.
Absolutely. I remember when it came out, and I went out and bought a copy. I didn't even take it out from the library. I went and bought my own copy and sat up late at night reading it because it was full of so much delicious dirt.
This was in the days before you had tabloid TV. There was an obsession with people like the Kardashians where life was not all about what would give you the next photo op. Well, it was about the photo ops, but it wasn't about structuring your lives around them.
I think the only thing that could parallel this was the existence in the 50s at the height of its power was Confidential magazine, where it had headlines about drug taking and alcoholism and gay relationships, and got sued periodically by major stars.
That's why Confidential actually went out of business,
Mhm.
because a combination of Dorothy Dandridge and Maureen O'Hara suing them took them out.
Yes, but they were the TMZ of the time, and as Dan said, remember there were 3 channels and PBS, and that was it. And they were movie magazines that told the lies, that were the opposite of Hollywood Babylon and Confidential. They presented movie stars as the paragons of virtue, that every marriage was a happy one, and no one beat their wife or had gay relationships. And the publicity machine from time immemorial in the teens, that started in the 1915, 1916, when they started to churn out these stories about when the matinee idols became prominent in the movie business.
One of the first movie stars to benefit from publicity that was looked at as not being 100% favorable was Theda Bara.
Mhm.
Theda Bara was actually the daughter of a seamstress, yet in order to create an exotic air around her, the publicity of that time said that her name was an anagram for Arab death, and that she had been born under the Sphinx, and that men had committed suicide for her.
And there was absolutely someone at the studio sitting in a room thinking these things up.
Absolutely. And one of the things that they did not realize was how quickly the modern standards of that era were going to come back and bite them in the rear end.
Mm-hmm.
For example, even though it was getting a lot of publicity, it was also starting to make a lot of the people who lived in rural towns, because America was still largely agrarian at this period, get upset. It was running contrary to what church leaders were teaching. Worse, more and more young girls were starting to get the acting bug and head over to Hollywood. Not to the degree that they would in the 20s, but it was already starting in the teens.
Mm-hmm.
And Hollywood was starting to get the reputation that would become solidified in the 1920s as the cemetery of virtue.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
A lot of it at the beginning was fairly innocuous. For example, Lillian Gish, a famous silent film star and one of the first recipients of the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award, was known as being the Eternal Virgin, and to the point where the male stars were not even allowed to touch her or to kiss her. Yet there were rumors that she and her sister Dorothy were more than just sisters. And that became a persistent rumor.
To your knowledge, was there any rumor about them with D.W. Griffith, who discovered them and starred them in many of his films?
Well, D.W. Griffith was not the casting couch. That was Max Sennett.
Yeah.
Max Sennett, a great comedian, director, started the infamous casting couch where he would bring the bathing beauties in and give them private auditions, so to speak. And among some of those bathing beauties were the young Gloria Swanson. Now, the rumor and it's pretty substantiated. She was Joseph Kennedy's lover because he had a bit of a career in Hollywood investing in films, and she had an illegitimate child with him, a son. William, I believe his name is. Yes, actually, it wasn't an unsubstantiated rumor. It was the truth because Kennedy was the one who funded her film Queen Kelly, the one that was never finished. Erich von Stroheim's masterpiece that you can still see the fragments of it in home video. And they have a segment at the back that shows you what he was going for, what von Stroheim was going for. And clearly Swanson, who had gotten just off of playing Sadie Thompson in the first adaptation of Rain, was certainly not someone who was afraid of a little bit of a scandalous relationship. In fact, Swanson had been DeMille's favorite because she had created his greatest of all marketing tools, and that was the bathtub. It's hard for us to remember in these days of jacuzzi tubs and saunas and all of that, but at one time, a bathtub was considered purely functional and not an aesthetic item. But because in his modern stories, Cecil B. DeMille always had a scene where the rich woman in a Park Avenue penthouse would take a bath in this glorious bathtub that was probably as big as most people's homes. It became an actual fashion, and it became something that became highly desirable. So your bathrooms today that take up half of your master bedroom square footage are the result of Gloria Swanson.
That's really interesting. And as you were talking, I was thinking about Mary Pickford, who was a woman in her 20s and 30s, who always played a little girl, and she was a stone alcoholic for most of her life. And her husband, Buddy Rogers, she was married to
Douglas Fairbanks originally.
The original. And then they divorced, and then she married Buddy Rogers. And from what I understand is that he was her protector for all during their marriage, because she became a recluse and died of alcoholism.
Yes, they were married after she divorced Jack Pickford, but Jack Pickford was Douglas Fairbanks was one of the initial movie stars.
Jack was her brother.
Yeah. And when he and Mary got married, they created Beverly Hills.
Yes, they did. Pickfair.
Yes, they created Pickfair, and the reason they created Pickfair was at that time Los Angeles was restricted, and so people who were Jewish were not allowed to buy properties in the fashionable area of Los Angeles, which was Bunker Hill and Westlake Boulevard. If you look at either of those, if you look at Westlake Boulevard as a street today, it's hard to imagine that it was once the street to live on in Los Angeles. But in between a lot of the newer buildings, you will see the remnants of the old mansions. And it was all because of that refusal to sell to Hollywood Jews, or to sell to anyone other than white Protestants, to be even more specific. A lot of these properties couldn't even be sold to Catholics.
Who could they be sold to?
They could only be sold to WASPs. In fact, my house, which was built in 1926, has in its deed regulations wording in it that means I shouldn't be able to live there, because
and that continued into the 50s and 60s too.
It wasn't until 68 in UNRWA that was declared illegal. And for years, I'm Japanese, and my parents grew up in Hawaii when Hawaii was extraordinarily racist and segregated. And even after my parents had the money to live on the eastern side of the island in Hawaii Kai. My mom said, there's no way I'm going to live there ever. Because at the time, when she was growing up, she had to work as a maid.
And I have a story about that. I grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, in a 5,000 Jews community of 5,000 Jews, and in the 20s, the town was in bad shape. And one of them was my uncle. These businessmen from New York came and built up the factories again, and there was a restricted country club that wouldn't let any Jews in. So the Jewish businessmen got together and they bought the country club. They said, you won't let us in? That's okay, we'll buy it. And they bought it and let everybody in, which was kind of like revenge, Jewish style. So it's really interesting, today it seems so antiquated, these mores, there were laws, and that today when our society is so integrated, much more integrated than we can imagine. But getting back to the gossip, one of the things that I was thinking about was how the drug taking that is so prevalent now in Hollywood and in society was very prevalent in Hollywood back in those days.
It was prevalent excessively so. In fact, one of Groucho Marx's early songs was "Hooray for Captain Spaulding," blah, 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 blah. You know who Captain Spaulding was?
Was he a drug dealer?
He was the cocaine dealer to the stars.
And you know what? And
this is when cocaine was legal. By the way.
They worked them like dogs. They had 6-day weeks and they worked 12-hour days. There were no unions. And so in order to keep their energy up, they needed the cocaine. Of course, there was alcohol, which has been around forever.
Well, during Prohibition, which was a big chunk of the 20s, Hollywood was known for being an extraordinarily liquid town even then, and that some of the famous nightclubs that we'll see in movies were originally the front end of hooch parlors. There would always be a door that would open mysteriously to another whole area of the club where you could drink.
And murder. There's murders. I was doing a little, reminding myself of the mysterious murder of William Ince on the yacht with, was it Mabel Normand? No, it was Chaplin and Luella Parsons. Refresh my memory.
It became the movie Cat's Cradle, directed by Peter Bogdanovich. I'm not necessarily a supporter of that film.
They thought Hearst did it because he was having an affair with Marion Davis, his girlfriend and the famous actress.
What was happening was that Tom Ince was a famous director in Hollywood and a very well-known director. And there was a party.
Did I say William? It was Thomas, right?
It was Thomas Ince, yes.
Yeah, right.
And there was a party that was on William Randolph Hearst's boat, the Oneida.
Right.
And also attending was Marion Davies, who was William Randolph Hearst's concubine, and Charlie Chaplin. Now, Hearst had not wanted Chaplin to be there because he was suspicious that Marion Davies was sleeping with Chaplin, and he was absolutely right. He was. Charlie Chaplin pretty much slept with all of Hollywood. And on the boat, there was a period when Marion Davies supposedly was really drunk, and she started being a little bit too obvious. It infuriated Hearst. He went after Chaplin with a gun. Unfortunately, Tom Ince was looking sort of like Chaplin, wearing similar clothes, and so he was the one who got shot.
So they think it was a mistaken identity. And speaking of Chaplin, his big scandal was his love of young girls. In fact, he married on several underage women.
Right, but going back to Ince, remember what happened there? That they had said that he died of appendicitis.
That's right.
And unfortunately, Luella Parsons happened to be on the boat as well. Now, Luella Parsons became the gossip monger of Hollywood for a number of years.
And it was Hearst who basically built her career to keep her quiet. That's
exactly.
The rumor.
It was a lifetime contract.
Absolutely.
Now, this is the speculation. Whether or not it's true, whether or not Thomas Ince actually did die of appendicitis, we'll never know.
Yeah. But the very fact that there is even any speculation shows us that the good old days were just as bad as the present time. And, to get back to Chaplin, he was one of the great, he's an icon, obviously, a brilliant physical actor, comedian, director, and he loved the little girls. He married Lita Gray. He married several women underage. And then, of course, his final marriage when he was in his 50s to Una O'Neill Chaplin, who's the daughter of Eugene O'Neill. They had 8 children, moved to Switzerland during the Red Scare. And he lived out his life with her, but it wasn't an easy life for her either, because he was a bit of a control freak. That's what I've read.
Yes, and when he first met Lita Gray,
Mm.
who was their marriage was the inspiration for Vladimir Nabokov's novel Lolita,
Mm-hmm.
and she was, I think, 12, and he waited until she was 15 to get married.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a fascination with that, but so did a lot of Hollywood. Roman Polanski, and this sounds creepy, but Roman Polanski was not an aberration. He
Mm-hmm.
is perilously close to have been normative.
Well, look at Errol Flynn. He was on trial for what? Statutory
Yes.
statutory rape of an underage girl, and he got off, possibly because of his charm and beauty. I think he charmed the jury.
Well, even in the 1950s, if you were a Hollywood star, you basically could get away with murder.
Mm.
Look at what happened with Busby Berkeley. Busby Berkeley, the famous director, driving drunk, killed 2 people, not even a slap on the wrist.
Let me ask you a question.
Uh-huh.
Lana Turner, Johnny Stompanato, and Lana's daughter. What was her name? Cheryl.
Cheryl Crane.
Cheryl Crane. Stephen Crane was the father. Yeah. The story is. Would you think Cheryl was covering up for her mother, or what's the rumor about that one?
That one is difficult because
And to
even
and to fill people in, Johnny Stompanato was a low-level gangster, very handsome, probably terrific in bed. And Lana Turner went from man to man to man, and they had a very volatile relationship. There was physical abuse, and then make-up sex, and then physical abuse. And the story is, one night, Cheryl Crane, who was 14 or 15 at the time, saw him beating up on her mother, and she took a gun that was in the house, and she shot Johnny Stompanato to death.
she actually stabbed him.
She stabbed him.
She stabbed him
Oh.
and with a kitchen knife. And there's multiple versions of what really happened there. Now, unfortunately, some of this gets clouded because the rumors were encapsulated in Harold Robbins' book, Where Love Is Gone.
Right.
And one of the rumors on this is that both Cheryl and Lana were sleeping with Johnny, and that this was also jealousy. There's the other rumor that Lana was angry with Johnny and that she stabbed him, and that Cheryl, being a minor, took the fall. Now, Cheryl, in her autobiography, pretty much stuck with the conventional story,
Right.
which probably is the most realistic. I need to do a little bit of a caveat on Hollywood Babylon. Kenneth Anger, when he wrote it, made sure that people understood that not all the stories in it were necessarily true. That's why it's Babylon, because when you say Babylon, it sounds like Babble on. So it's some of it is true, some of it isn't. But
Does he do a disclaimer in the book?
he doesn't do a disclaimer in the book, but he was very, very clear about the fact that
This was a rumor, and this could have. Yeah,
Yeah.
he didn't say definitively. He was trying to give everybody the story, the possible story behind the story. Yeah, that's interesting.
What he was also responding to is he felt that Hollywood had been ruined by the academization of entertainment, because this was the first film school generation, and you had a lot of books coming out, movies and methods, these heavy tomes about the art of movies. And what Anger was trying to do in a very Andy Warhol sort of way was to bring it back. That Hollywood was not this town filled with nothing but these brilliant artists who might have been ruined by money men, but it was a town full of scandalous people.
Is Anger gay?
Oh, yes.
So what the gay subculture in Hollywood was, loved gossip, and it also held secrets to itself. I mean, it's hard to understand in this day and age how closeted people were. I mean, their lives, their careers were at stake. A career could be ruined by any identification with homosexuality.
Well, you had the whole concept of the Twilight tandem,
Yeah.
which was when you would have the gay actor marry the lesbian actress, such as Cary Grant and Lily Demita.
Elsa Lancaster and Charles Lawton. Yeah.
And that just was the way things were done.
Vincent Price and that blonde woman, what's her name?
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I can't remember her name either. Yeah, she was in that movie with Susanna York, that lesbian movie.
well, even Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli.
Right. Well, he said he was gay in New York and straight in Los Angeles. I mean, that was.
He was
I
straight
read
enough in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
but he still showed up on the set with purple eyeliner.
Yeah.
And when Liza was born and she looked the way she did, everyone was like, oh my God, they must have used a turkey baster. Judy herself went through certain lesbian phases.
Right. I think she and Lana Turner?
Oh, Lana Turner and Ava Gardner
Lana
were
Turner.
allegedly together.
And that Frank
for a minute.
Sinatra divorced David when he found them together.
Yeah.
Also, the thing that broke my heart is when I found out Tyrone Power was bisexual. Not just because he was one of my great loves. And he was Judy Garland's greatest love. That's what I heard. That was the one that really broke her heart. And she went through a lot of men looking for daddy.
The sad thing is that the people who were drawn to show business then as now are usually people who don't necessarily have the strongest self-esteem.
Yeah.
And it is that lack of self-esteem that once it is combined with unbelievable wealth can lead to people acting out all the things that they never had when they were growing up.
Unbelievable wealth, fame, a persona, and a publicity machine that will cover up for them. In other words, it was very safe for a lot of them to live these kind of secret lives because they had press people like Libby in A Star is Born, Jack Carson's character. He's a great character and what an underrated actor, but that's another podcast. And how they would cover up for all the misdeeds, the alcoholism, all the scandals. One of the scandals that I remember, my mother always loved Sexy Rexy, Rex Harrison, and Carol Landis was an actress who was involved with him. And he was a cold-hearted bastard, and he broke up with her. She committed suicide.
Yeah, she did. Two of his ex-girlfriends committed suicide. Rachel Roberts.
That was his wife. They were married
Yes.
for quite a while. My God, he must have been awesome in bed or something because these women committing suicide over him. Really? I mean, think about it. I mean, a broken heart and drinking too much, but suicide? Oh my goodness.
Well, Carol Landis allegedly had an affair with Jacqueline Suzanne, so she was kind of swinging both ways. She had written a book called Four Jills in a Jeep about her experience.
They made that into a movie.
Yes, going on USO tours.
Right.
And it was apparently during some of her USO tours that she started experiencing that side of life. I don't know if she ever hooked up with Marlene Dietrich during that period, but Marlene Dietrich was another one who was very, very much a part of that scene in Hollywood. She and Claudette Colbert and Janet Gaynor had what was called Marlene and Sewing Society. And it was the lesbians in the business who would hang out.
Let me ask you about Dietrich. Was she straight lesbian or was she bisexual?
No, she's bisexual.
Yeah, because she had Hemingway was one of her lovers.
Hemingway was her lover. The French actor. They were both doing resistance things together.
Yeah.
And
Jean Gabin?
Jean Gabin.
Yeah.
There was that period when Hitler was determined to bring her back to Germany and make her Germany's big star. And there were actually kidnapping attempts made on her in Hollywood.
Well, the interesting thing about Dietrich, and this is kind of cute, is that she was a German Hausfrau. And if she came to your house and there were dishes in the sink, she'd do the dishes, mop the floor, and make you chicken soup if you didn't feel well. She was like this great movie star, with this these legs and this persona. She was very, very sexy. And yet underneath it all, she was a German Hausfrau. Which I find really fascinating. Speaking of foreign actresses, Ingrid Bergman, I mean, it's hard to understand this in a day and age where single women get pregnant with their fiancés or their boyfriends and nobody blinks an eye. And in my opinion, I think we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. There is no shame at all. And I think back then it tilted the other way where there was so much shame. Ingrid Bergman was married to Peter Lindstrom, and she had a daughter, Pia. He was a dentist, I believe. And she fell in love with the Italian director, Robert Rossellini, and got pregnant by him and had the baby after the divorce was final. And she later married Rossellini. But because of the outcry, she had to leave the country. This was in, what, 52?
No,
48?
It was in the late 40s.
Like
Joan of Arc
49?
was her last movie, was 49. And she went to Italy to be in Stromboli and a bunch of other of Rossellini's movies at that period. And it was a scandal. Congress actually passed a law against her.
Yes. She could not stay.
She could not come
and
back.
Anybody listening to this, yes, it's true. She didn't come back until late in the 50s. And
1955.
In 1955, she did Anastasia. Yeah, and she rebuilt her career and went on to she played Golda Meir on TV, and she won an Academy Award for Murder on the Orient Express.
She won an Academy Award for Anastasia.
That's right.
If you look at that film, it is not one of her strong performances.
No, it isn't.
It was an award that was given to her for surviving the scandal.
Absolutely.
And for everyone saying we overreacted.
Just as Elizabeth Taylor got the award for that tracheotomy and being overlooked for Suddenly Last Summer. I mean, if you want to deny that the Academy Awards aren't political, emotional, sentimental, it's not just about the art. Periodically, it's about the art. Usually, and I was thinking about this, and getting, I just want to bring this in, and then we can get back to scandals. Is that I was thinking about the awards that are basically about the art, and the Academy Awards is the writing awards and the supporting actor awards are very often based on merit. But it's the bigger, even bigger awards, the Best Picture, Best Actor, and I just wanted to mention that because we did have our Academy Award podcast.
It's very true.
Mm-hmm.
But look at how important Elizabeth Taylor was to the sociology of the later part of the 20th century. Here you have this child actress who would hang around with Lassie and have a chipmunk named Nibbles that she wrote
yes,
about.
and her horse, yes.
And she grew up to be this siren. She was one of the few people who made that transition from child star to adult star. And
a big child star to a huge adult star. She just didn't become like Roddy McDowall, who was a wonderful actor, but he was a supporting actor in his adult years and a starring actor as a child. And then the same thing with Dean Stockwell. But Elizabeth Taylor was even bigger as an adult. And her marriages, every part of her life was publicity. Her first husband was Nicky Hilton, son of Conrad Hilton, who was they were married less than a year. He beat her on the honeymoon. He was a gambler, a drinker. Then she married Michael Wilding, the English actor, had several children and 2 sons, and had a pretty stable marriage, fairly stable marriage. And then she met Mike Todd, who was 25 years her senior, as Wilding was also older. And Mike Todd, this is the legend that they slept together. And the next day he said to her, from now on, you'll substitute the word sleep with no one but me. And she divorced Wilding and married him. And their fights were legendary, madly in love. He was a Broadway showman. He was broke. He was rich. He was a powerhouse Jewish entrepreneur. And he got on a plane in March of 1958 to go to New York to do something. He produced Around the World in 80 Days. And she was too sick to go on this private plane, the Lucky Liz. And it crashed into a mountain in Arizona, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And she went into mourning. They had to sedate her. Rex Kennemer, the doctor up to the stars, had to go to the house and sedate her for days. The pictures of her at the funeral. And then who is comforting her? Eddie Fisher, who is married to the little America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds, Mike Todd's best friend. And 6 months later or less, because she was so sexual, she said, I had to have a man. They're together. And this was a huge, huge scandal in the late 50s. You cannot imagine.
Here's what was even more devious about that scandal. The studio loved it.
Mm-hmm.
The studios loved it because Debbie's career had kind of hit a skid. Eddie's career as a singer was good, but he was also considered very bland.
And his biggest hits were earlier, were 53, 54, 55. He was starting to fade by this time.
He definitely was. And he and Debbie did not like each other. And they were ready to get a divorce. And the studio basically said, no, you're America's sweetheart. You cannot divorce him. So Liz coming along was perfect. And also Liz, it was always, oh, poor innocent Debbie, evil vixen Liz. Liz is all of 24 at this period. Debbie's almost 30. And it certainly didn't hurt Elizabeth Taylor's box office. Cat on a Tin Roof went through the roof.
Yes, that was the movie that she, like maybe a month after Mike Todd's death, she went back to work.
They were in production when Mike Todd died.
That's right. Right.
She credited that movie with saving her life.
Absolutely.
And
you know what? All I can think of when I think of that movie is her in that slip. Because that's the big visual. That's the one with Paul Newman, the Tennessee Williams, the Williams play. She's in real life, she was I saw her at the Academy Awards in '76. My late husband and I were privileged to buy tickets from friends. And she's short.
She's 5'2".
5'2", with this beautiful bosom. I mean, she's had this incredible upper body, and of course that face. But that's the minute I think of Cat in a Hot Tin Roof, I see her in that slip. This is the power that Hollywood has. The images that are emblazoned upon us. And this is why Dan and I love to talk about these things.
Well, moving on to why she was so important is that look at how big that scandal was. It erupted on every newspaper. She was condemned by the Pope.
And
Meanwhile, her movies are making a fortune.
And she didn't care, and she just proceeded to move ahead in this relationship, and he was like led around by the collar.
Yeah.
And what everybody has to understand is back at the time, there was no TMZ, there was no internet, there were movie magazines. There were like 4 or 5 movie magazines, Motion Picture, Modern Screen, and I bought all of them. And they for months and months and months, this was the headline. This was the bulk of the stories, was this scandal. Then she, all her life she's been in the public eye with, she has used sickness as a way to get attention. And all her life she would get sick and get attention. I mean, something back in her childhood triggered that. But then, of course, the other scandal was she was married to Eddie Fisher. She went to Rome to make Cleopatra. Richard Burton's married to the very lovely Sybil Christopher, has 2 daughters, one of whom was handicapped, was disabled, retarded at the time. Retarded was the term, and was actually in an institution. And she falls in love with Richard Burton and takes him away from Sybil Christopher and Eddie Fisher, and then gets sick and has that pneumonia thing in the tracheotomy.
Before. The tracheotomy was before Richard Burton. What happened
was it?
Yes, what happened was that she had been offered the part in Cleopatra, and it was $1 million. She had not wanted to do it, and so the $1 million had been a joke. She said, I'll do it for $1 million. But in order for her to be able to do it, she had to make this movie called Butterfield 8. And Hunt Stromberg gave her the script, and she threw it at him and said, there is no way. And he goes, we're going to hold you to this contract, and you won't be able to do Cleopatra.
And that's what she won the Oscar for.
And after Butterfield 8 was shot, as they started filming Cleopatra, she got sick.
Oh, she got sick early in the filming.
She got sick.
Yeah, and Eddie was at her. That's right.
Hospital.
Eddie was at her side. Yes, I remember that. But then she meets Burton, that Welshman with that voice and that face, and they were dynamic together. Their chemistry, and the interesting thing is that there didn't seem to be any conscience on the part of these people. They just threw, all caution to the wind and proceeded ahead with their great passion, and didn't care about any lives that they destroyed.
They really didn't. And
No.
There was that infamous picture of them on a raft.
Oh yeah, and they're half. Yeah,
and that picture went around the world.
Yeah, they
And
were on the boat, and she had her top off, and she was lying down, and he's in a bathing suit. Yes.
Interestingly, even though the scandal broke huge, it did not have the same impact as the Eddie scandal did.
Right.
Because by this time, I guess people had already decided that Liz was just this man killer. And not only that, but here it fed right into the publicity of Cleopatra. Cleopatra has a horrible rep as being one of the biggest bombs of all time. But when you think about how much money it cost in adjusted dollars, because it was so mismanaged, Cleopatra cost almost $800 million in an era with no home video.
Oh my goodness! And another point about her leaving Eddie Fisher for Richard Burton was Eddie Fisher was not popular. He was a bit of a yutz, and people said, "Oh, Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor, really?" And then she meets this man he was very handsome. He was really good looking, and he was charming, and he was a great actor. So I think people were more on their side because of the image that they presented. They would say, "I would have left Eddie Fisher for him."
The other thing that was interesting about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton is they took chances. He made her a better actress. He allowed her to find what would define the latter half of her career. And if you look at her movies with that in mind, going backwards, you actually see it was there in her earlier films, but it was never tapped. With Burton, she had
she had freedom. She had freedom and confidence. Yeah, he did make her, because he was such a great actor. And I think I saw the spark of all that in Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift. I think that's where she became an adult actress, because she had already done the Father of the Bride movies and the second one where she has a baby, and she was still very young. But
18.
Come to Mama, there's that scene with Montgomery Clift, Come to Mama, very powerful. And you go, oh yeah, she can do it. But she also made clinkers, and they did it for the money. They made the Sandpiper, Boom.
The Sandpiper was huge.
I know.
The movie that was the turning point was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which ironically, and I don't know why more film teachers don't talk about this. 1965 was the last year of the production code. The movie that won Best Picture that year was Sound of Music, produced and written by Ernest Lehman. The movie that ended the production code and started the
Virginia Woolf, he did the adaptation.
He wrote the adaptation and produced it.
That is really, really interesting. What did Albie think of the movie? Do you?
Hated it. And Albie, even to today, thinks that it's a horrible adaptation. And this is why you can't always trust what writers think of their own work. In the same way that Burton and Taylor would appear in Boom, based on Tennessee Williams, the milk train doesn't stop here anymore. And Williams, not being ironic, would go on the record more times than once saying that Boom was his favorite adaptation of all the adaptations of his movies.
And Tennessee Williams was interesting. His honesty is absolutely amazing. And let's move on to another big scandal. It wasn't as big as Liz and Eddie and Richard Burton, but it was Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood, when she was a little girl on the Fox lot, she saw Robert Wagner, who was a young contract star, very handsome, maybe 10 years older than her, and she was about 9 years old. She was already a big child star, and she said to her mother, "I'm going to marry him." When she's 19 and he's like 27 or something like that, in the middle to late 50s, they get married. And they're so young. And so whatever problems that they had, and there are rumors about him being bisexual and whatever. And she, from what I, don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I know people who knew her who said she had a drinking problem, that she drank to, cover up emotions and deal with things. And she goes to make Splendor in the Grass in 1960-61 and meets Warren Beatty, who's catnip for women. Catnip for women, and she has an affair with him and leaves Robert Wagner, and that was a very, very big deal. A very, very big deal. Dan, what's some of the scuttlebutt on that one?
Okay, there's a lot of scuttlebutt around Natalie Wood. First of all, there was always talk about R.J. Wagner because his manager and agent was the same guy.
Henry Wilson?
Yes. He was managing Tab Hunter and Troy Donahue and Rock Hudson.
All the gay boys.
All the gay boys. And so why would Robert Wagner be the odd man out? The other issue about Natalie Wood is that she actually starred in a movie that was a romanticlef about her relationship with Wagner. And that was Inside Daisy Clover. Inside Daisy Clover was written by Gavin Lambert about she and Wagner specifically.
Interesting, because in that Redford plays the Wagner character, and he's basically a bisexual, more gay than bi, and that she marries him and wakes up in the morning. He's left her a note, "I'm really sorry."
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a very interesting movie. Very interesting movie. Wow. So
and then there's all the rumors about what happened on the night boat that she died.
Yeah, that she walked in on Christopher Walken and Wagner. Now, of course, everything we're saying is rumor, but it's very interesting because what the story is to the public and what is whispered about in Hollywood. What do you believe?
Well, I really don't know what to make of this one, but the fact that 30 years after it happened, the case was actually reopened and it remains open to today. And
her sister insists that Wagner had something to do with it.
Right. Now, in my personal opinion, I'm pretty sure that she probably did run into Wagner and Walken, and she was angry because he had sworn that he was not that way anymore.
And she was kind of drunk.
They were all drunk and high.
And she got in that boat. She said, "I got to get out of here. I don't want to be around this." She was so angry and unfortunately slipped and fell into the water and couldn't swim. And she always was afraid of the water, always felt she would die in the water.
Well, remember, if you
that
ever
movie,
see
Betty Davis. What's that, Betty
Star.
Davis? The star.
If you see the star, in fact, Natalie, it's so creepy to see this. If you ever see the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award about Betty Davis, Natalie Wood tells the story about how she was always deathly afraid of water. And for this movie, they threw her in the water over and over again. And Betty Davis told them to stop it.
Yep.
So
It's
when
it's
we-
ironic. It's the height of irony. And I
it's
absolutely
sort of like that moment in To Catch a Thief when
Yeah.
you see Grace Kelly driving crazily along the,
Right,
the streets
right.
of Monte Carlo, right where she eventually had her fatal
yeah,
accident.
it's predictive, isn't it?
It's predictive in a very creepy
creepy.
way.
And also, I think everybody remembers, those of us who remember where they were when JFK died, was I when RFK was killed, where was I in 9/11 and all of that. But I absolutely remember where I was when I heard about Natalie. I was at my kitchen sink in my old house in East Hollywood, washing dishes. And I started to cry. I was so upset. My mother, when Clark Gable died, we heard the news in Macon, Massachusetts in the morning, and I came downstairs to have breakfast to get ready to go to school. And my mother is sitting in the rocking chair in the living room weeping because Clark Gable is dead. This is the power of that movie stars, these icons have over us. So when we talk about all these tidbits of gossip, it's absolutely fascinating because their public personas so often do not match what the reality is.
But it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't.
Because Natalie Wood for years was considered a terrible actress. And in fact, the Harvard Lampoon used to give out movie worst awards, and it was the Natalie Wood Award for Worst Actress. And she had a great sense of humor. She actually showed up at the Harvard Lampoon Awards and gave herself away to the winner.
Mhm.
And so she had that nice sense of humor.
It's so interesting that she had that reputation because if you look at her performances as a child actress, she was such a natural. Miracle on 34th Street, her first movie, I think, was The Stranger with Orson Welles. She was a very little girl. She was just a natural. And I think she was a wonderful actress. I think she did Hysteria better than anybody. That scene in Splendor in the Grass in the bathtub, when she's yelling at her mother, "I'm still pure." What is the line she says?
I'm still pure. I'm not dirty.
She says, "I'm still a
censorship
virgin."
Problem.
Yeah, I know.
What's interesting about Natalie Wood is in 1961, she was in 2 musicals. And I think her bad reputation rested on the
Gypsy?
fact that she was in Gypsy and West Side Story, and people felt she was miscast.
And you want to know something?
When you see them today, she's good.
Yeah, well, yeah, she's good.
When you see Gypsy today, the 1961 one,
Yeah.
People still will complain about Ethel Merman, but that's 60 years ago. No one remembers.
No, what do you mean, Roz?
When Rosalind Russell got the role, everyone complained about it. But when you see Gypsy today, not only is Rosalind Russell surprisingly good in it,
Yeah.
but Natalie Wood is luminous as Gypsy.
Yeah, no, I think it's underrated. And I saw Ethel Merman in Gypsy, where she enters from the back of the stage, "Sing out, Louise." That was a once in a lifetime thrill, let me tell you. I also saw Streisand in Funny Girl, and so I was blessed to have parents who kind of took us to the theater. But that's another podcast. Getting back to Scandal, now it's now you read Delisted and there's TMZ, and it's so matter of fact. It's so casual now. People stealing people's husbands and every gay people now come out, which is not necessarily scandalous. It is in a way courageous. I mean, I think soldiers are courageous, but I think in a way it is courageous because their careers can be at stake, and they also don't want to get typecast. You're gay, you can't play a happily married man.
Ellen DeGeneres learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
After she came out on The Ellen Show, which was a very brave move on her part,
Mhm.
especially at that time. It's hard to remember today the impact.
And
of The
that
Ellen
was in
Show.
the mid-90s. That was like 97, 98.
No, it
95?
was 90. I think it was 99.
Okay.
Because it was right before I started teaching here. And when she came out, it was a big move, but it was also a career smasher for her.
Yeah.
Because she was in that movie with Harrison Ford, and I'm blanking on the title, and it totally died.
She was in a movie with like Bill Paxton, where Mr. Right, Finding Mr. Right,
Yes.
or something like that. She had also been on a TV series on HBO back in the 80s, and also when she had a terrific stand-up act. Also, of course, she's now Ellen DeGeneres in that show, and she's obviously openly gay, and it's no big deal. But the great thing about her coming out episode was not just that she came out, was how funny it was. It was brilliantly written, and it was hilarious. So she reinvented herself. she was fortunate enough to be able to reinvent herself. And she's much beloved now by so much of America that doesn't care that she's gay.
Mhm.
The great thing about all of this is that it isn't a big deal anymore if someone is gay.
But that's why Hollywood has been so important, because Hollywood, on the one hand, can be a vanguard in a negative sense, but it's also a vanguard in a positive sense. The Elizabeth Taylor thing allowed divorce to become normative. It allowed people to not feel they were trapped in a marriage forever. The Ellen thing allowed for a lot of gay people to not be afraid of that. I still remember when Rock Hudson died of AIDS.
And how he refused to admit it.
He would not admit it until literally right before he died. And it was, and there were lawsuits against his estate from people who were in scenes with him in Dynasty. Was it Dynasty or Dallas? Dynasty.
Dynasty.
And
But that's when they thought if you kissed someone, you could get the HIV.
Absolutely. So it was a very touchy time.
Yeah.
But it was because of the AIDS epidemic that you suddenly had the flowering within 25 years of just having all of this be so open.
And I was thinking about it because in the end it's called acting. So if I know that Rupert Everett is gay and he's in a movie, for instance, where he plays a heterosexual father of 4, I'm not thinking, well, he's gay. I'm watching his performance.
Unfortunately, it's very difficult to divorce that.
Yeah.
That's why straight men playing gay roles is not a problem. But
Yeah,
gay men playing straight roles makes an audience.
Can you think of one where an openly gay man has played a straight role in recent years?
Not a romantic one.
Not a romantic one. That's really interesting because it's called acting.
And if anyone can think of one,
chime in.
Because I
can't think of one
can't
either.
Think of one.
Nothing in TV.
It's still the reverse. You have straight men playing gay men predominantly.
Yeah.
And there's still that sense that once you're open, that you kind of you kind of typecast.
Neil Patrick Harris played Barney, the womanizer Barney.
Yes.
On How I Met Your Mother, and he was brilliant and believable. So to those people who think it's impossible, casting directors, whoever, it's not. A good actor will I never thought about him being gay. I believed he was Barney.
Here's the other thing, though. Neil Patrick Harris was never looked on as a sex icon. He was never looked on as a stud. That is why, I'm not going to say one way or another, but when you hear about the Tom Cruise thing, why that is still so white-knuckled, why the John Travolta thing is still so white-knuckled.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because those are two guys who had an incredible push as leading men.
Right.
Not as the funny sidekick, not as the doofy guy, but as someone who was immensely attractive to women.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one's going to complain about Harvey Fierstein playing, but for some of these others, it would make a difference. Imagine if someone found out Harrison Ford was gay.
Yeah.
It would be.
We're not saying he's gay.
No, we're
it's
not.
an example.
But it would change.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
And in the same way that Mark Hamill's recent talk about how Luke Skywalker might be gay, I'm sure that's treading on people. They're not going to say it right now because you're not allowed to say certain things right now. But that's an example. There's people who are uncomfortable about that. Just like when it was mentioned that Hermione might be lesbian, and when J.K. Rowling came straight out and said Dumbledore was gay, that caused a lot of parents to go, wait a minute.
But you know what goes too far when they start insisting that Lincoln was gay, because in those days when men slept together in the same bed to stay warm, that because he and Billy Herndon shared a bed that he was gay. And it's like this to me is going a little bit too far. And the thing that I said, not that there's anything wrong with that, Seinfeld fans will remember that from the episode where George and Jerry, the young journalist, thinks they're gay. So every time they talked about being gay, their tagline was always, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's not my line. I'm just quoting them. That's interesting.
Well, the Lincoln thing has other sides to it, because it's not just that they were sharing the bed. It's some of the letters that Lincoln wrote to him. But even then, is that just a style from the era? And I don't know.
And for me, I kind of resent it because it's like bringing an historical figure. It's like let it go. It's like just there's more important things to deal with than to declare that Abraham Lincoln was gay.
It's tertiary.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's funny gossip, if nothing
Yeah,
else.
and it's like a part of an agenda, you know. And there's a line from a movie called In and Out, which is one of my favorite movies, with Kevin Kline, about the teacher who's outed, and Tom Selleck gives a brilliant comedic performance when and it's 20 years old, so here's some spoilers. When Joan Cusack is left at the altar and she goes off in her wedding dress and she's at the bar and she comes on to Tom Selleck and she says, "Oh, just please sleep with me. I just have to, you know, and she comes on to him and she says, "It's okay. You don't have to love me. It's okay." And he says, "I'm sorry, I'm gay." And she has that thing, "Is everybody gay?" That's kind of my attitude. And it's like, enough already. Enough already. What's your take on that?
Within Hollywood, it's an overrepresented group.
Yeah.
And it's because the arts always draw people who are
Right.
sexually ambiguous to them.
Right. And in the end, you know, this sounds so corny, but in the end, whatever is created by whoever of whatever sexual orientation, it's the work that matters.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
In the same way that the peep show peccadillos of so many of our greats shouldn't be used as a reason to discredit them, because no one ever said that an artist has to be moral.
Mm-hmm.
Your artistry has nothing to do with personal values.
And I disagree with the politics of a number of major stars, and I don't boycott, because then I wouldn't see very much. I have to divorce I worship the talent and have an opinion about some of their personal or political beliefs, because I'm just so eager to either sit in front of my TV or go sit in the dark and dream with strangers and watch something that's going to move me or entertain me or inspire me.
Well, for me, look at Alfred Hitchcock. He was very abusive to people, especially towards women, and most infamously toward Tippi Hedren.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean, and again, it was allowed a little bit more at that time than it would be today,
Mm-hmm.
but does that diminish him as an artist? No. Does that make him a role model for how any of us want to live our lives? And the answer again is no.
Mm-hmm.
But we shouldn't be looking at him. And Hitchcock would have been the first person to say this. Why are you looking at me for how to live your life?
Look at the movies I made.
Yes.
And also, the rumor about him was that after his daughter was born, he never slept with his wife again.
There's a rumor that he slept with his wife like 1 or 2 times in his whole life.
Yeah.
That he was basically celibate, and that his whole life was spent in sexual frustration because he knew how undesirable he was because of his size and
he
his portliness.
had this thing about all these blonde women: Grace Kelly, Tippi Hedren, Kim Novak. Interesting. Also, the rumor is about Elvis and Priscilla. Big love affair. And after Lisa Marie was born, he wouldn't sleep with her because the Madonna whore, she was now a mother. And so she couldn't be a sexual object. This was a man who was really kind of ruined that way by his relationship with his mother. He slept in the same bed with his mother for years when he was young, and her death almost destroyed him. Yeah. And that's another podcast about Elvis and his issues.
That's the thing, is that this stuff ultimately is interesting where it has its value is when we see how people were able to take that weird side of their life and turn it around.
Yes, when you listen to Don't Be Cruel, which was his favorite of all his records, you don't care anything about his personal life. And when you see him in the performances on Ed Sullivan and Steve Allen, or when he was young and so very beautiful and burst upon the scene as the king of rock and roll, you're absolutely correct. And then you can forget how the dreadful way in which he died and how he was in the later years of his life.
Well, what's creepy about Elvis, and especially toward the end of his life, is how similar he was, only much younger, to Howard Hughes, where he became increasingly reclusive and he became increasingly locked into this world of yes people around him who were enabling him to get worse and worse, much like what happened with Michael Jackson, much like what was happening with Whitney Houston, where
nobody could say no to him because he was the boss. They wanted to keep their jobs because he would fire them. Yeah, and they all and they talk about this, because I listen sometimes to, on Sirius, the Elvis station, and they will talk about their guilt, that they should have stood up to him and not do that, but they were just protecting their own rear ends. But they agonized over this, and he was their paycheck, he was their God. Interesting stuff. You wonder what would have been like if so many of these people who died so young. James Dean would be 85 years old this year, February 8th, 1931. I know that. I adored him. And I'm trying to think, you look at him 23, 24 years old. What was he going to be like when he was 30, when he was 40? How would he have come into his own?
I think the unfortunate thing is you see the model of what he could have become with Marlon Brando,
Mm.
where he would still give just the most magnificent performances, but it's hard to look at early Brando without seeing the desiccated Brando that would come later.
Yeah.
Where you see him in Streetcar,
Mm.
and as you're watching Streetcar, you see flashes of him in Apocalypse Now.
Mm.
Or worse, that nice thing he did with Matthew Broderick.
The Freshman?
Yes. Where you're just,
I kind of like The Freshman.
it's okay.
Where
but-
he did a play on The Godfather.
Mhm.
Well, what's interesting about Brando is how much he talked about how he hated acting. And one of the things I can recommend is it's an HBO or Showtime documentary called Marlon Brando on Tape, because he recorded all the time his thoughts, his ideas. He had incredible ideas about creativity and acting. He was really, really smart, and how absolutely beautiful he was. And maybe in another podcast, we can talk about how important it is that the camera loves you as an actor. The great ones, the camera could not get enough of actors, the face of Marlon Brando. That there's something charismatic and lit from within. All the great ones are lit from within. And it's heartbreaking to see him as the young Brando, what he turned into, that mountain of pudge that he turned into. He turned into a behemoth, a self-destructive behemoth. So much of these great ones have such the self-destruction, the self-hatred, that is in direct contrast to the adoration that they receive from the public. And I'm sure that if you don't come from a solid background and have a good, strong ego identity, it can ruin you, and it has ruined so many of them.
Well, the other thing is why a lot of the stars from the 30s lasted in a way that stars from later generations didn't is because they were they were the icons, the first. And when you look at someone like Joan Crawford playing the shop girl who made good, it wasn't only because she happened to have a lot of camera charisma or that she was especially gifted as an actress. It's because their story, their real life story, was coming through their performance.
Absolutely. Coming from poverty, perhaps making nudie films. She was a dancer, and a hoochie dancer. That a lot of them, like Carol Lombard, you look at their stories. What's her name? Jean Harlow. A lot of them, no fathers, coming from poverty. They never forgot that.
Exactly. When you see Jean Harlow in that outfit in Dinner at 8 during the, well, I was reading a book the other day.
And Marie Dressler has that double take.
Uh-huh.
It's
Reading a
brilliant.
book. Well, I heard it's a crazy book. It says that one day that we'll all be replaced by machines. It's crazy.
And what is
book.
Marie Dressler's not in
She
your
goes,
case?
she goes, my dear, that's something you never have to worry about.
She was awesome.
But you look at that and you think that Jean Harlow grew up on a farm where they had an outhouse.
Yep.
And even with her platinum blonde in her ermine,
She never forgot that.
Yeah.
She always stayed connected to those roots. Yeah. And you think about Gary Cooper, he came from Montana. John Wayne's roots. They were working class, and they never ever forgot that. It's really, really interesting. And a topic to talk about is the longevity of so many of these great stars, and the ones that burst onto the scene and then faded. They had no staying power. And also it's nerves of steel. It's like a steely, Joan Crawford, she's under steely-eyed ambition in the dictionary. Nothing got in the way.
But that's how show business still is today, ultimately.
Yeah.
That the people who are able to sustain it for a long period of time, particularly if they're in front of the camera or in a director's seat or as a writer, it's not a job for wimps.
No, it isn't.
It's a lot of fun, and it's amazing because even if you don't think you have that inner side to you, when you get that opportunity, it manifests itself somehow.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of times when you look at the scandals and you see what people went through and how they survived it and how they turned it into their art and made it better.
Mhm. And what we have, the legacy we have, is not just the movie magazines or the Hollywood Babylons and the stories, is what's on the screen. That's the real legacy.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
So we are wrapping for this week.
Thank you, Dan.
We will look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Fox.
Thank you.